You're listening to Emmy Award-winning host Jordan J. Adams.
For over a year, every day, I drove my kids to school drunk. Now, I wasn't actually drunk. It was the lack of sleep that made it seem that way. But the CDC has
After
shown
the
that
death
to
of
get
her
less than
son in
6 hours of
2008,
sleep
Tara
over 2 weeks,
Youngblood suffered
it is
from
the same as being
insomnia
legally
and
drunk.
depression.
And that
Determined to
was me.
find her way out, she spent over
In
10,000
2007,
hours
we lost our
studying the
youngest son,
science
Benjamin.
of sleep.
Grief,
Applying her
depression,
analytical
virtually
skills
eliminated
from
by
her
sleep.
physics and engineering
When you go through a
background,
traumatic
combining
event,
multiple
you remember
disciplines,
every
including
vivid
alternative
detail.
medicine and
I
sleep
can tell you how the
diagnostics,
hospital
her
disinfectant
research
smelled,
led to a
or about the
solution
buzz of the
and
fluorescent
over a
lights in the
dozen
hallway.
patent filings.
My
She's
nightmares were
co-founder
not
of
about
Cryo
scary
Inc.,
monsters.
CEO,
They were about
co-founder, and
reliving the
chief
event
scientist
over
at
and
Chili
over
Sleep
again
Systems,
in
a
no different
TEDx
session.
speaker, and best-selling
Lack
author
of
of
sleep destroys your
Reprogram Your
short-term
Sleep.
memory.
I am
And I would
so
end up in the
pleased
grocery
to spend
store
this
in brain
time with
fog,
sleep
not
science
sure why I was
expert
there or what I
Tara
needed to get.
Youngblood. How are
Good.
you?
Thanks for having me. Great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure.
So first, I'm so sorry for the loss of your son. And now this has led to a lifelong quest. And if it's okay, would you mind sharing with the viewers what happened?
Yeah, so it was very sudden. He ended up getting bacterial meningitis, and uh, you know, it progressed very quickly in him, and it's often a diagnosis where, unfortunately, you end up with brain death. That's not uncommon with that, and so we are very grateful. He became an organ donor, and his heart still beats and lives
Oh,
on, as well as some other organs and other to other people. And so I couldn't be more proud of him in a lot of ways. If he had been a firefighter or a war hero, it'd all be great, but he's our hero. So yeah, that's it was a really tough time, but I look back and I actually had a conversation with someone the other day, and once you go through loss, it puts you in a different place to be much easier to have that empathy, to find a place of common ground with people. And a lot of my work with veterans and PTSD and depression with them, I feel like that has actually been a huge silver lining, to be able to really get to that same plane. And even though our experiences are different, the depression and mental illness that results from any sort of trauma in your life creates that common ground that I think more people need to talk about it and say, yeah, I suffer from this, and this is what I have to figure out how to wrap my head around my practice and my habits and my sleep in order to keep myself in a good spot.
I've seen the videos of organ donors meeting the people who have the organs in them and whose lives were saved. And they are some of the most emotional. I choked up talking about it. They're some of the most emotional videos that you could see, and especially when the person usually a parent or a sister or a brother who listened to the heart in that person who got the heart transplant, and they hear that heartbeat. Ooh, sorry. That hit me hard.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
woo.
it's
That's a moment, that's a
it
moment.
is. It is.
Did you have a chance to listen to the heart?
No, unfortunately, the person that received his heart is in Seattle.
Uh-huh.
And so we, even before it was cool to do virtual like we're doing now,
Yeah.
we ended up doing it virtually. So.
Oh, that's sweet. So what was it about his death that actually made you want to study sleep? I'm not sure that, help us
I
with the
know that
connection there.
correlation doesn't do that. So actually, we had invented the Chili Pad, which is our sleep product. Really came out with it the year before, but we had been in sort of development and in the invention space of it for probably about 2 or 3 years. And for me, the sleep connection really became, I felt like a hypocrite selling sleep or this product intervention, and it wasn't working for me at the time. And I really had to understand how sleep works and why, because we would get these wonderful calls of, this changed my life. This is so, so impactful. It's amazing, but it wasn't amazing yet for me. And so the path was really about that, studying about sleep and really the power of temperature, the power of how to regulate your sleep, how to create a sleep recipe, as I call it, that is unique for me. And really create, what is that sort of testing protocol? What is that basis in which you work through and look at sleep when it's broken to find your way out? And, it really isn't any different than biohacking per se, or some of those other ways in which we describe, really going deep into how our body works in order to get past something, or to find a hack or workaround. And for me, it was really about finding that workaround. I use my Ooler completely different than I use the original chili pad, and I can get into all the reasons why I did it wrong. But I did it wrong to start.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Anything that has to do with biohacking, I love, and I know our viewers love. And so when I heard even the phrase reprogramming my sleep, I didn't even know that I could program my sleep, let alone reprogram my sleep. Up until, recently, until I discovered you and your science, I would just lie in my bed until I fell asleep. Sometimes it would take forever. It takes forever for my wife. Well, not until recently. It took forever for my wife to fall asleep. She ruminates, and her brain works really well. And so it takes a long time to wind down because it can do so many things so well. I said, hey, you know what? Be glad that your brain is
Yes.
doing so many things that doesn't let you sleep. Like, my brain has been sluggish, and I want to touch upon that later on, but with the brain fog and stuff, but generally I don't have the problem of sitting there and ruminating because my brain is usually, fogging up on me. So I usually fall asleep pretty easily. So tell us a little bit about reprogramming your sleep, or maybe even before that, programming your sleep.
Yeah, so sleep really is habit driven. And once you know sort of the basis of it, which really is chronotype. So, chronotype is a fancy way of talking about your body clock and when that situates in relation to the 24-hour clock that governs all of us. And so, when you think about chronotype, it's driven by a specific gene, but you can take a quiz that is just really will get you to whether you're more a morning person or a night person. And there's a spectrum of results, obviously, with billions of us. We're all fall in different places on either end of that, in between. But when you think about being a morning person, it means that you want to go to bed between 9 and 10 and wake up at 6:30. If you're more of a night owl on the extreme end, you may actually go to sleep ideally between 12 and 1, and wake up more in that 8 o'clock kind of range. So there's a pretty wide scope. And then obviously then you have people that are shift workers, or don't have consistent sleep schedules, and how do you work around that? That gets to some of the reprogramming. But once you know your clock, then you can start putting into that sort of different habits and different things that are going to make that sleep consistent. Because sleep is really kind of a fuddy-duddy in the sense that it really likes consistency, and it likes having some of those habits, and how do we make that consistency work? And temperature, turns out, we didn't know it when we invented it, but turns out actually has a magical relationship with sleep. Those neurons in your brain that govern the unconscious parts of heart beating and breathing in the hypothalamus region of your brain towards your brain stem, those are all driven unconsciously. You can influence it, but you're not going to be able to change it. Temperature talks to that part of your brain. So it's pretty magical in that there's actually a sleep switch, and that's part of programming your body to know when your sleep switch is and how to flip the switch.
So before we get into the cold, which I love, I can't wait to talk about cold because that's been changing everything for me. But before we get into the cold, can you reiterate how we know whether we are the chronological morning person or evening person? And I'll follow that up by saying, I know what I am now, because if I go to sleep between 9 and 10, I'm jumping out of bed at 6 a.m. now. Part of that, of course, is the Ooler. But I will talk about that in a little bit. But how, for the folks at home, how can they uncover whether they're best served by being a morning person or being an evening person?
Yeah, so on our website, we have a chronotype quiz. There's a bunch out there. All of them are pretty good. Chronotypes were first discovered in the 1970s. And so there's pretty good information out there. But maybe in your show notes, we can put a link to that so they can take the
For
quiz and
sure.
get
We
that
will definitely put
information.
a link to your
Then they won't
website.
have to
So if people are
search.
watching this right now and they want to scroll down and follow along, they can go to the website. That will be right underneath this video. All right. So that's how we'll find out chronologically whether we're a morning or an evening person. And now one of my favorite subjects. And I'm gonna preface this by saying there's not been a lot of things that have moved the needle for me in my quest to try to get healthy. This whole thing for me, the whole discovery process has been for my brain because of debilitating brain fog. And that's why I'm doing this. The first thing that moved the needle when nothing else did was intermittent fasting. That's been a game changer for me in a huge way. I still haven't eaten yet. We're taping this at 3:45 East. I still haven't eaten yet and I feel fantastic. So that's been game changer number one. Game changer number two is putting this pad, who'da thunk it, this pad on top of my mattress called Ooler and putting it at 55. And I get out of bed now. My sciatica is gone. My knee pain is gone. And I'm skipping over to the kitchen and doing the dishes at 6 a.m. while my wife is feeding the kids. We have to get up early for the kids. Their school is across town. And 6 a.m. used to be nasty for me and nasty for my sciatica and nasty for my knees. It does not exist anymore. What the heck is this nice 55 degrees doing for my knees and my back?
Same area of your brain that regulates, that helps with fasting actually is also where your temperature regulation is for sleep. So sleep and fasting share a similar part of the brain, which is not unusual for those kind of things. But cooling does a magical thing. Cooling itself should be almost separated from sleep and the power of what cooling can do. So I will say, as a side thing, if you haven't tried cryotherapy, if you haven't tried sort of cycling your cooling and other temperatures outside of sleep, it will increase the oxygen levels in your blood. It will work through your inflammations. Cold is a very powerful technique. From physics, we talk about that as entropy, and that heat and time together can take a number on our bodies. And so cooling does amazing things for our body. When it comes to sleep, it triggers a change in temperature, triggers that sleep switch. But when it comes to deep sleep, especially for your users specifically, so when you've had a traumatic brain injury, similar to some of those veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injury, the combination of any sort of mental health issue, deep sleep is one of those elusive unicorns when it comes to when you've had problems with your brain, and it becomes really difficult to achieve good quality deep sleep. In a normal 20-year-old person, you're going to get 2 hours of deep sleep. Well, by the time you're 80, that drops down to almost nothing. And when you combine any traumatic brain injuries or mental illness with it, you can get almost zero at any point in your life. And so what happens without deep sleep means your body doesn't heal or recover almost at all. It means your memories aren't filed. It means that there's very little maintenance that happens. And when we think about it, if in your house you never filed anything on your desk, and you've never cleaned anything up, you never removed any toxins from your house, you can imagine it wouldn't take but a month or less or a week. We've all not done the dishes or something and it gets really messy. If we're not deep sleep, our bodies are like that. And so they're sluggish. That's where you get some of your brain fog. It means over time that can turn into autoimmune disease. It can turn into Alzheimer's because the plaque builds up in our brains. And that's what they're now thinking is part of that link is lack of deep sleep to Alzheimer's and cognitive loss. So one of the first things that happens when you go into deep sleep is you actually get a brainwash, which isn't the brainwashing thing that we think about, but it's truly a brainwash. Your spinal fluid comes up over the top of your brain and washes it. And what it does is it does remove the plaques that have built up and those toxins that have built up and sat there. So if you imagine if you never do that over time that would build up. Your memories are filed, so they all sit in a holding pattern in your hypothalamus. And once you're asleep, you start cycling through, deciding whether that gets filed away in long-term or short-term memory. That's where, what did I have for lunch last week? That gets lost, because unless there was some particular event or something that was tied to what you ate for lunch, like your house caught on fire when you were making grilled cheese, then it might stick, but otherwise we lose what we ate or wore, or those little bits of facts that we don't need over time. All of that happens during sleep. Your sympathetic system, which when you think about it, that's your fight or flight and your recovery system. That system has to get back in balance during sleep. So that's where we cycle through stress and physical exertion. So all those physical recovery methods, we have a lot of professional athletes. In fact, even in COVID, in the bubbles, we've got full teams sleeping on it, for the reason that that recovery is so important to get that deep sleep. So a lot of our athletes are actually more in the 3 hours of deep sleep because they really need it, and that physical exertion has pushed that.
You know, it's so fascinating when you said your spinal fluid comes up and washes over the brain and cleans it. It's so miraculous and so elegant and so beautiful, and so amazing. It makes me just want to work with my body. You know, it's funny, a good physician will tell you, I don't fix you. You know, I might be able to take away some pain during the healing process. I might be able to, you know, ease the discomfort in some way or point you in the right direction, but it's your body that fixes itself. And it's almost like we can get out of the way and stop messing it up, it will fix itself. Now, you triggered something in my mind, and I'm wondering if there's similar dynamics. So during the intermittent fasting, which, you know, we mentioned briefly at the beginning, one of the things, if I understand it correctly, when you give your body a rest from digestion, it can now take its vital life force and cleanse itself through etophogy. So it's kind of getting rid of broken DNA and broken mitochondria and bad cells that could get wacky, and plaque and just gunking up the system. Is that a similar dynamic to getting cold for the brain?
It is. It is. Well, cold in relation to sleep, yes, because cold then translates heavily into more deep sleep and more time in those deep sleep cycles. But cold has all sorts of, that's where a cryotherapy chamber is going to have cryotherapy will look a lot like that intermittent fasting, but you get it in an immediate hit. And so even after you've done a cryotherapy for 2 or 3 minutes, you'll walk out and you'll actually feel like you've just breathed like extra air, like you feel highly oxygenated. Inflammation will go down and things like that. That same thing happens during deep sleep. That's sort of the function of deep sleep. And so, you know, one of the alternatives to taking an ice bath for a lot of our athletes, or even a cryotherapy, is making sure that every night you're cold enough in your muscles and your whole body. And the separation here is a lot of people will hear sleep between 60 and 68 in your room, but by the time you're on that mattress, which is often not, it's all man-made materials, it's not natural. So those little foam bubbles that make us feel really soft and squishy, they're actually absorbing heat, and they're going to reflect that back to us. The cover that covers over us helps insulate our bodies. And so just like a Ferrari or race car of your choice, your body needs a radiator to manage its temperature at night. You wouldn't pad a Ferrari engine around with a whole bunch of insulation and expect it to work well. So you really have to make sure that that engine that you are has a chance to cool and run effectively. And it is just like an engine. You really have to keep it cool in order to run properly.
You had mentioned earlier, and maybe you can give us hints on how to get there. The 3 different stages: deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep. Can you tell us the differences between those 3 stages of sleep and where we want to spend the most of our time, and how do we get in that a user's manual, if you will?
Absolutely. So the different types of sleep are really based on brain waves. And so in the truest sense, academic world, we're going to look at your brain waves, and based on this frequency of those waves, we're going to see what sleep you're in. So just like you would imagine, REM sleep looks very similar to when you're awake. And that's the one that often is the last sleep cycle right before you wake up. And a lot of those dreams that feel very vivid and you're very active in, rapid eye movement or REM sleep, looks a lot like what your brain does when it's awake. light sleep is kind of a ribbon of like almost like the place in between. There's things that do happen, and there's a lot of research going on into what the role of light sleep is, but that's the most predominant part of sleep. So that's going to happen. All of them will happen throughout the night, but light sleep is going to happen and is probably the one that most people, when they're looking at the density of their sleep or quality of sleep, efficiency of sleep, any of those adjectives, will probably throw out first, because it's light sleep anybody can do at any time. Deep sleep is the slowest form of brainwave, and that's when you, as you can imagine, your body is slowed down and it's trying to recover and heal, and work through those other things. And so deep sleep, although you do work through all your different cycles, deep sleep really starts as a start of your sleep window. And that goes back to that chronotype. And so the first half of your night, it's not to say you can never have a deep sleep cycle in the second half, but it's predominantly, if we're looking at it as a unicorn we're trying to catch, we really want to catch it in the first half of the night. That's going to be most obvious for it to be there. And if it doesn't show up there, then the later half of the night, oftentimes that means your resting heart rate isn't dropping soon enough, and we really still want to try to move it back to solidly in that first half. And REM sleep is kind of the opposite, where it does occur in your other cycles as you move through all those three stages, but REM sleep is way more predominant in the second half of the night.
Just to get people up to date, and especially for people who may just be tuning in, we're talking with Tara Youngblood. She's co-founder of Cryo Inc., CEO and co-founder and chief scientist at Chili Sleep Systems, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. She's a TEDx speaker. She has a ton of videos online, you guys. You want to definitely check her out if you really want to drill down on how important sleep is and all the different stages of sleep. She's also the best-selling author of Reprogram Your Sleep. So we are talking to the right person. You have sleep issues. This is the right person to talk to. So out of those three stages you just mentioned, is there one that we want to be in more than the other, and one that is typically hard for the average person to get into these days?
So a little bit will depend on sort of your parameters of your genetics, your age, your gender. If there are any underlying conditions, all of those will influence that. Deep sleep and REM sleep should be in balance, though. You really want to aim for 2 hours of each. And so that was one of the other things that I found in my research was, especially in someone that was young and easy to get that deep sleep, their deep sleep would start cannibalizing their REM sleep if they didn't pull back on how cold they were for the second half of the night. And so it's less of a problem for someone that has a harder time getting deep sleep, but it will be if you're finding that you're not able to keep that in balance, or if you're really physically active, sometimes that'll push the deep sleep to be bigger than that. And then occasional, I just ran a marathon, or I just had a really big fight and it goes into 3 hours, isn't a problem. But on a trending average, you want to keep those in balance of 2 hours in each spot.
You know, it's interesting. I have not gone into the functionality of the Ooler yet. So far, just putting it on 55, and I think I'm like Todd, your husband. Just put the ice pack in the bed, put it on 55, and I'll sleep all night like a baby. So I haven't had to do any kind of temperature adjustments, and I'm waking up feeling really good. So it ain't broken. I ain't fixing anything. But for some people, is it important to have it be cold for a certain amount of time and then warm it up the closer you get to waking up? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I think it really depends. Again, as we get older, deep sleep becomes the harder one to get. REM sleep can be much more consistent. Some people do struggle with REM, and I can get into the disorders in which that appears. But for the most part, I'm guessing your audience and a lot of people as they age are going to really struggle with that deep sleep. So that's why where you're sitting at cold the whole night isn't going to hurt you, because you really need to get that deep sleep and your body's appreciating that. But that, just as I mentioned, REM sleep really, so your core body temperature is really important to think about. So as you go into sleep, your core body temperature is trying to drop 2 degrees, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about what does 2 degrees feel like when you have a fever, it feels like a lot. And the same goes for when it wants to drop. So that's your heart, your lungs, those innards, not your fingers or toes, but your core wants to drop 2 degrees. And again, if you're wrapped up in insulation, it's very hard for your body to put off that heat. And so once you've hit that sort of valley bottom, that's your first half of your night. That's your deep sleep time. And the second half, you're going to come out of that valley. That's, figure evolutionary wise, the sun is coming up, you've passed the dark of the night, and your planet's starting to warm up, and your body wants to warm back up as well. So those 2 degrees have to come back up. And that's when we want to turn off our sleep switch. So if you're having a hard time getting out of bed, one of the ways you can do it is warming yourself awake, which is another feature of Ooler, where you can set the warm awake alarm. And although we think of being warm and cozy in bed, if that bed gets too hot, your body actually triggers itself to get out of bed and will get a little jump start.
I'm going to share with you and with the viewers and with Todd, one of my favorite biohacks for people who run hot. So I'll go in the cold shower, and then I fill up 2 big 30-pound buckets of their Lowe's bucket. I fill them with water, and I have an ice chest in my garage, and I'll put those in the ice chest and freeze them. So I have 60 pounds of ice. Then I'll take those the buckets of ice, and put them in the tub. Once I've already brought my body temperature down, then I get in the tub with the 60 pounds of ice. And my goal is not to get out of the tub until I've melted all the ice, 60 pounds of ice. And the reason being, and maybe you can drill down on this, when my body starts getting really deep shivers, apparently that's really good for the brain.
Really good.
Really good for the body.
It is so good for you.
Why is deep shivers good for the good? I'm doing it just because you guys are telling me it's good, but why is it good for us?
So it goes back to that inflammation. It goes through circulation, all of those. It touches every single system at a very high level. For the physicist in me, if you look at the age of the universe, it is not measured in time at all. Actually, it is measured in something called entropy, which is a combination of time and, you guessed it, heat. And so entropy actually is what we're headed towards as we look at that, our own mortality. Entropy is what pushes us towards that. And so just like the universe, any chance we can get to reduce the heat, especially heat over time, we're going to actually help ourselves down the road. So, but you'll feel it in terms of the levels of oxygen and minerals, that cell transfer that's so important in your brain, but it's also in the neuron parts of how you fire. Your mitochondria, as you mentioned, all of those little tiny parts of your cells all appreciate basically that break from the heat. Just like in a hot summer's day, when you cool down, you start to relax and your resting heart rate can go down. Everything about cold helps you put you in that state. It's amazing that if you haven't Googled him or heard of him, Wolfman, the Iceman, he walks barefoot.
Hoff?
Wim Hof methods.
Yes.
There's so much that happens with cooling. So it's really important to that cold cycling, will reduce your sort of, even your viral load. When you think about coronavirus, where we are right now, and immunity and staying healthy, your recovery when you're cold and heat cycling. And again, you can't just go and hang out and shiver all the time. You need a hot and cold cycle it. And that cycling of normal to cold is really powerful for our systems.
Right. Like the body, just like lifting weights, is a stress on the muscles. And in a way, it's an inflame. You're inflaming a little bit, but you're making them stronger and better because you're demanding more of them. So I like to say, like the body's saying to me, "Oh, you still need that? Okay, I'll keep making it for you. You still need to keep killing deer. All right, we'll keep giving you the quads and the glutes." And for people who, are just kind of like trying to get their brain around this, it's important to remind them you spent over 10,000 hours studying the science of sleep. You're a sleep science expert, and you have a background also in physics and engineering, which is a wild combination of the two. And not a lot of people would put those 3 entities together, but boy, what a synergistic result when you put them together. I like that. This stuff to me is just fascinating.
It is. I think that I really feel like the power is, especially when you can include like Chinese traditional medicine and Ayurvedic traditions. You know, in modern science, we think we've solved a lot of things, but there are parts of where medicine has come from that there are some great traditions. You know, we look at diabetes in this country as almost a terminal diagnosis, but it doesn't have to be. In Ayurvedic traditions, they actually, again, retrain you, reprogram you, and they don't see it in an Ayurvedic hospital. You would be treated for diabetes over a 6-month period and then released back to the world. But they'd retrain your habits and fix it.
So the big thing we're all dealing with right now, the coronavirus. For me, I found out, I did a fight in Miami about a month ago, and they tested me, and the doctor said, you were exposed to the virus. You have antibodies. He said, do you recall any kind of event? And I said, about 3 months ago, I had a little bit of vertigo. He goes, that's probably it. And I said, that's it? That's my COVID? He goes, yeah. He goes, you have a strong immune system? And I said, well, I biohack like nobody's tomorrow, and I feel really good. And he said, yeah, your body probably kind of just, dusted off the virus because it's already got all of those elements in place. You're stressing it all the time. So it's, it's fit. Your immune system's fit. So apparently I was exposed.
I would put a lot of power in A, your deep sleep you're getting, and B, those ice baths. That combination is amazing for what it does to our immune system. You know, you need to get that deep sleep in order to cycle your whole body through that and the consistency over time. But those ice baths and that sort of stress pressure release valve is a magical combination. They've tested, again, back to Wim Hof, where they've tested people that get great deep sleep and how it's looked at their immune system. They'll give them a vaccine and see what the results are. And as far as the efficacy of that, there's so many different studies that have been done that your immune system really does appreciate good deep sleep, and it also loves cold cycling.
So I'm doing a couple things right. Okay, what's that saying? Okay, I got that going for me. Now, the stuff that I haven't gotten handled yet, and this may be out of your realm, and please forgive me if it is, and just let me know if it is. On the nutrition space, do you have any opinions regarding, there's kind of really essentially two camps, and that's probably unfair to say, but there's kind of the paleo, keto, high protein, high fat, low carb people, and then there's the vegetarian, vegan, high fiber, high microbiome people. Kind of two camps, right? I'm trying to fix my brain. That's my biggest thing, is the brain fog. Do you have any opinions on that, Tara?
I do. Although I don't think you're going to like my answer. So
oh, I love it. I love it, man. I'm compliant.
Opinion,
I'm a compliant patient. Just tell me what to do.
So my opinion is there is no one healthy diet. There is a healthy diet for you. And unfortunately, what that turns out to be is, for us that are willing to biohack, it means you need to find what works for you. And so anyone that tells you that a paleo will work for everybody is wrong, flat out wrong. Our genetics are all really different. And when you look at it over time and what are all the things that go into it, very quickly you discover that a certain type of eating, just like the intermittent fasting, works really well for you. There is not one thing. I will say, though, that anytime you remove sugar, which is probably the biggest enemy out there in the modern world, it is really not good for us. And you remove any of those processed chemicals, that is, anytime you can do those two things, you're going to win no matter what. That is 100% fact. But then the nuances of whether or not, if you're a vegetarian and that feels good for you, then don't switch over to being a caveman diet that is all about meat. Same with Atkins. If you're not a bacon eater, you shouldn't probably do that one. So, I think there's a lot of value in figuring out, and I would highly recommend, there's Everly Wells. There's so many different do-yourself testing on food sensitivities. It's amazing when you kind of do a quick little finger prick, and it'll come back and it'll kind of look at it. I would have loved spirulina. For example, it's generally a healthy kind of thing. It's green, and I don't see why it wouldn't be, but it came back of I have a high reaction to it, and it really throws off my immune system of all things when I eat it. It's like a, not quite an allergy, but it's a sensitivity where it's like, I shouldn't really eat that. So, it's amazing what you think you're doing right sometimes, and having a little bit of insight into who you are individually will help steer that.
I know that's so true because I'll have a big healthy meal. Now we're 4 o'clock. I still haven't eaten, and I can almost guarantee it'll be healthy as all get out. And about 25 minutes after I eat that meal, I'm going to be like down, just bonk, insulin bonk. And it's got to be some kind of my immune system seeing that protein or that particular carb as a protein, as a bad protein or an invader or something, because healthy food shouldn't do that to me.
No. And I will say that, gluten gets overdone or whatever. The problem about a gluten thing to me is if we just ate wheat where it's supposed to be in bread or regular carbs, but they put so many fillers in things, and it goes back to that processed food, that so many of those underlying things that would or would not be a big deal now have become a much bigger deal because we're oversaturated on them. And so even if you don't want to do like the whole blood test, I highly recommend doing a food diary and experiment. Is there a night that you don't feel the crash afterwards? And if so, what did you eat? And kind of go through a testing process of your own to really look at, oh, okay, well, every time I eat sweet potatoes, it throws me off. But whatever that is, pretty soon I'm betting you can find it out.
I don't want to end without talking about some of the award-winning products you've put together. You are actually doing something with that 10,000 plus hours of study, scientific study, engineering study, and sleep and temperature studies. We talked about the Ooler, Ooler mattress pad. It
Ooler
won
without the C.
There you go. Nice. It won Product of the Year for 2019 by Tech News World. And the Chili Pad was named a best wellness product for powerful moms in business by Forbes, none other than Forbes. Can you tell us a little bit about the Ooler and the Chili Pad? I've already been singing high praises to it because I am jumping out of bed, no exaggeration, at 6 a.m. And when my kids melt down, I am not losing it anymore. So, it's doing something. I couldn't tell you what it's doing. Maybe tell us a little bit about it. We know why you invented it, but tell us a little bit about the science of it.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you what the difference is between the two of them. So the Chili Pad is our legacy one. If you do follow biohackers, Tim Ferriss was one of our first biohackers that used it. But everyone since then, Dave Asprey, all of those guys all use it.
You just named two of the Grand Poobahs in the space right there.
Yes. And so it's really like a thermostat for your bed. It is located right under your sheets, and it's just like I talked about it being a radiator. It runs water at whatever temperature you set underneath you. And just like you would consider a traditional thermostat where you set it and forget it, Chili Pad is like that. And so there's a remote, but pretty much if you set it at 55, then it just stays there, or at 110. Depends on what you want to do. The Ooler is the next generation because it has an app and it has some of those programmable thermostat kind of feels to it. There's a little bit of coaching and how you work through the schedule, just like I talked about, sort of the first half of the night and second half, and how you should think about your sleep as you're working through what will best work for you. But it does all of that. It's got a little lower profile. It's got multiple fan speeds because there is a heat sink in it. That's how we work through the temperature regulation. It does a UV cleaner, so it'll clean the water. Just like a humidifier, it can gunk up a little bit. And so the Chili Pad, you'll have to use a cleaner, but you can buy the cleaner, or we can show you how to do that.
I'm
but it does it all by itself.
Distilled water. Sorry,
yeah, it does help, especially if you have hard water, just like any other humidifier
Florida, the water here.
all of those similar sort of water things we'll deal with. So if you have really hard water, we do recommend distilled, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah.
It'll last longer, just like your humidifier.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. And for the people who are listening and can't read the show notes right now, would you mind giving us your web address so they can make a mental note if they're driving? A lot of people listen to this while they're driving, and they might want to make a mental note so they can go look at, what you're all about. What would be the best website?
Yeah, chilitechnology.com. And, you can find out more in my blogs there called Pillow Talk. But you can also go and look through our products there. We also have a weighted blanket version, which is kind of interesting if you do have a fair amount of anxiety. And I would say my husband has very little anxiety and is now addicted to it. So it's worth a try, even if you don't feel anxiety. But weighted blankets go back to some deep pressure treatments that were designed for autistic children. And they've really developed over time to be a way that you get a quick hit of serotonin when you're feeling a little bit stressed out. So if you want to settle yourself out, even before a fight, I wouldn't necessarily do it publicly. They might wonder what you're doing. But as far as like settling yourself down to go to sleep, your wife, for example, that has a hard time, my brain spins as well. And so weighted blankets are just a great way to hack that. And it's temperature regulated because, again, as soon as you put a heavy blanket on yourself, it can get really hot. So you can temperature regulate that as well.
Wow. That just sounds yummy in every way.
Yes, you can make a sandwich of temperature then.
Oh, I'm going to have to get me one of those too. Well, I thank you so much. Is there anything you want to make sure, like the 3 or 4 things that the people make sure they do, just to serve a simple little mental checklist, 3 or 4 most important things to do to really try to get their brain around sleep science, and just 1 or 2 actionable items?
Yeah, so obviously the first thing is that chronotype to kind of understand when you should go to sleep. But the next thing that has the biggest influence on sleep is stress. And so as we think about stress, not just on emotional, but physical stress, we need to try to reset ourselves. And when you think about sleep, think about how it starts in the morning. If you think about sleep at bedtime when you're tired, it's going to be not quite too late, but you really want to think about it in the morning. Get outside, and as silly as all these breathing techniques and meditation that you've been hearing about, they actually work and they really can help you out. So my best tip is, since you have to use the restroom anyway, take an extra minute every time you use the restroom to breathe, whether it's a box breath, which is 8 seconds in, hold for 8 seconds and breathe out, or you're doing a shorter in than out where it's 3 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Any breathing technique, all of them, what they'll do when you do it for a minute, you'll actually wash the cortisol out of your system. So again, if you don't want to try the weighted blanket before you go into the fight, if you want to actually just take a moment and just breathe and settle your brain down, breathing will do that. And if you do it when you're using the restroom anyway, it doesn't affect your day very much.
You mentioned before the fight. Thank you very much for that. Props to our audience, a lot of them being fighters. Extra important for them to get their brain around this sleep science, and extra important for them for the spinal fluid to be getting rid of the garbage. These guys, when they're sparring, they're getting hit and they're taking a lot of trauma to the head.
So traumatic brain injury is a real issue. A lot of the work with the military, beyond the PTSD, there's a lot of traumatic brain injury there as well. And, one of the problems about that is it really is very disruptive to sleep. It's very disruptive to deep sleep. And one of the things that most is affected is that deep sleep. And so when you can get your temperature of your bed to talk to your brain and you don't have to participate in it, it's amazing how that gets past some of those injuries and goes right to the source of that regulation, which is in your hypothalamus, as I had mentioned. So it doesn't fix it, but when you look at the studies, the length of time it takes to recover, what that recovery looks like, what your brain functionality is, and what happens with healing, all of those have huge percentage differences on someone that's getting deep sleep and someone that's not.
And I know you and Todd, with your various companies, and you guys have just done such a great job and been so successful. I know you guys do a lot of giving to the various veteran organizations. Is there anything you want to shout out there if people want to learn more about the traumatic brain injuries and some of the sleeping science protocols around that?
Yeah, so I don't have, most of our work with the military, unfortunately, a lot of the research is sort of proprietary, and military is good at like not
Oh
wanting you
yeah.
to talk
Oh yeah.
about those kind of things. But I will say we do work with various veterans, and if you are a veteran, you can apply to get a free one. During COVID and really still going on, we've given over, I think it's $1.5 million worth of product now to healthcare workers this year. They have some of the
Wow.
worst sleep for people that really should be considering health and sleep, but the shifts and the timing and all of the things for their sleep is terrible. So, support all of those people any way you can with encouraging them to sleep as well.
Golly. Well, I mean, we can't thank you enough for everything you're doing for the veterans, for, the first responders, and just learning about this science. I'm indebted to you. All the people who, you spent all this time, and I don't even know if you knew back then, these 10,000 hours you were doing, like how many people, like you've gone what we call vertical. You went vertical. You specialize. That is specialization.
I did. It did just start with me trying to fix myself, but I think that the fun part is it gave me a pathway to make a difference. And it is probably the thing that on the days that are like, oh, this is really hard, it is those conversations, or having a moment with a veteran. I talked about sort of that silver lining of having the empathy. I've had a lot of really big guys that don't tear up or show emotion, and we're sitting there sharing some tears over what they've gone through and what their sleep looks like. It's just heartwarming to even make a small impact on that, because it's a really big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm not going to call over $1 million worth of help a small impact. That's a huge impact, and that as a direct reflection of how hard you and Todd have worked. Thank you for the impact. Thank you for the difference you're making. And thank you for all the science. It's helping me, and hopefully this gets into a lot of people's hands. And it's just like, people helping people. It sounds kind of corny, but it's true. It's people helping people.
It is. And to that note, if you have questions, I am online as a sleep geek, or reach out through Chili and any of the social channels. We work really hard to answer any questions you have, or any way we can help on that.
Tara Youngblood, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
For our full schedule of fights on the NBC Sports Network, CW and ABC affiliates, visit UnitedFightAlliance.com. United Fight Alliance. United we fight.